Hey everybody, I'm Marcus Hazelwood, and welcome to Clear Haze Exchange. I'm an energy engineer with over 15 years of experience in sustainability and energy efficiency consulting. Many find these topics a little complex, so I created Clear Haze Exchange to help provide clear, actionable insight, clearing the haze, so to speak. We'll cover plenty of topics under the umbrella of energy efficiency and sustainability. Let's get into today's conversation. Welcome to Clear Haze Exchange. Our guest today is Kalpana Sutaria. She is an architect, author, environmental advocate with over 3 decades of experience designing climate responsive buildings and shaping sustainable policy. Based in Austin, Texas, Kalpana has spent much of her career as a project manager for the city of Austin. Her passion is environmental stewardship. She's also a volunteer with Citizens Climate Lobby, advocating for policies that reduce carbon emissions across all sectors. Kapana is the author of Cooling Our Environment, an architect's vision to combat global warming, where she explores the intersection of architecture, climate action, and policy. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Marcus. I'm happy to be here.
I know you have a book that you just came out with, and so I'm sure we'll get into talking a little bit about that. But just to start out, what's one thing people often misunderstand about green building?
So, about green buildings, there are levels of how green the building is. So, you can do something very small or something very large. So, like USGBC's LEED certified project or even Living Building Challenge certification. So, green buildings contribute, positively to increasing emissions. They they lower it, but they still contribute. And so we have a long way to go to uh, reach net zero emissions, like the Living Building Challenge buildings do. But very few buildings are able to do that. So I think we should understand that green building is a starting point, and we have to move towards net zero in order to cool the environment. So.
Yes, it's a very aggressive challenge in terms of where we are at now and thinking about strategies towards it. So what drives your passion for sustainability and climate responsive design?
So it is my upbringing in Ahmedabad, India. And I had very loving grandparents and parents who inculcated value of conservation in me. They were Jains, and that's how I was brought up in Jainism. And Ahmedabad was a very hot uh, and arid climate. My grandfather built it in outside the old city, in the new city. Very little electricity, but there were no fans, no air conditioning. So when the summer temperatures were, 105 degrees Fahrenheit for months, I felt that heat, that oppressive heat. I used to get heat strokes at time, and I know people who did too. And so we opened the doors and windows. Found shaded areas to get fresh air, but it was still very hot. So finding comfort became my obsession at that age. I was thinking, how do you feel cool in this weather? I know that now I'm in Austin, Texas, and I do have access to air conditioning, but there are millions of people we know, you and I both know, in the world, in the US and in the world, who have very little access to air conditioning. And so they suffer more with the warming world. So this was my interest
Yeah.
of work.
I can only imagine temperatures as you've explained. People typically build their passion from direct experience. But you've also spoken about your concern for future generations, which is related to kind of how you're feeling now and the work that you're doing. How does this shape your work as well?
So I call them both my hometowns, Austin as well as Ahmedabad. They both have global warming affecting them.
Yeah.
So, just like the rest of the world, temperatures have gone up. And when I talk to my brothers, they routinely tell me how thick the air feels with humidity and pollution. India has many polluted cities due to fossil fuel and other growth and other aspects. So they feel that it's really hard to even go out and take walks in fresh air during a large part of the year. So I feel that we as a generation is going to leave a planet for the young people which it's not their making, and they will be suffering through air pollution and other things. And I'll tell you, when my parents took me to see the Himalayas, the majestic mountains of Himalayas in the 1960s, I still remember the beautiful sight of Himalayan glaciers and the fresh air that you can never replicate. And so I feel like our young generation should be able to enjoy the environment like I did. And therefore, I will take action, you know, to alleviate that. And I'll give you the quote from Joan Baez. She said, "Action is the antidote to despair."
Mm.
So instead of my despairing, it makes me feel good to take action.
Yeah, that's good. There's a difference between wanting things to happen versus taking action to help achieve it. So, how did your education in India and at UT Austin influence your architectural philosophy?
In comfort became my obsession. My maternal grandparents lived in the old city of Ahmedabad, and old city of Ahmedabad has homes which are 300 to 400 years old, and they were built to combat the heat. And so I distinctly could see the difference when I went to my maternal grandparents' home, that how cool their homes were compared to the homes where I lived, outside the city. And my School of Architecture was built in the 1960s, where there was very few buildings in Ahmedabad were air conditioned. So it was built to, again, with using many passive climate features to allow for ventilation, allow cool natural light from the north side, have very massive walls to, not allow reduce the heat gain and all that. And so I studied, um, while studying in School of Architecture, I studied the old homes for my undergraduate thesis. And then I continued that at the University of Texas at Austin to further test those ventilation in those homes.
Mm.
In the physics department, I was able to do that, which was very lucky. And so I believe that passive climate system we can reduce use of electricity and water. And I feel that those are the most valuable resources of the earth that we should not waste. And this, I think, is a no-brainer. So even if you are designing a building that is going to be air conditioned, we should use as much of passive climate strategies as possible to reduce the amount of electricity, the size of air conditioning equipment. When we reduce all that, we can even reduce the peak load. And so that's that's my study that I did, and I continue that work now. So
That's good. That kind of gets into the next question I had around understanding what it means to design climate responsive buildings. And like you pointed out, that ability to reduce your dependency on systems and capitalize on environment. So how would you say would be an example of design that's climate responsive in buildings?
so I believe that planning and design strategies, when they are determined during the preliminary phase of the project, become the most effective in building, because when you do it in preliminary phase, you can have all aspects of the building designed that way. They work together. It's a very skillful way to design so that it brings joy and comfort in the building too, when you respond to nature and you bring light and ventilation. So there are just a few passive strategies that I will mention. There are many, many such strategies, and I know architects around the world are implementing them, but very simple ones that anyone can introduce. are like building location that accounts for surrounding site conditions, then orientation that lets cool light in and ventilation by avoiding harsh sun. This is something we learned in my School of Architecture is avoid harsh sun. Then design the exterior facades for shade, roof and wall insulation to lower heat gain, native trees and plants, and use materials to ensure health of inhabitants. And there is one very important thing I'll mention, and that is the roof design. Color and material has outsized impact on the overall building. If you see when you fly and you see all those dark roofs, even in Texas, where it's so hot, it somehow is a norm to use very dark roofs. I changed out mine after my home was built because I could not stand the dark roof. So I have some numbers that when dark roofs absorb 90% of solar radiation, while light color roofs reflect about 75%
Wow.
of solar radiation. So I, these are some of the very basic things I feel would make a big difference in the final product and reducing air conditioning.
That makes sense. How do you approach sustainability and design pieces like this in public projects? And could you give us some examples on how you're able to ensure or advocate for these strategies in public projects?
I I'm a owner's representative, and so they our department allowed me to make many decisions because I make budget and schedule and preliminary program. And it also adds to the responsibility because I'm spending taxpayers' money and I want to use them wisely. It's a added layer of responsibilities. And so this is what I do right from the beginning, prepare a building program uh, so that when we hire consultants to start designing, we have a good basic programs that incorporates as many sustainable guidelines as possible. Because we know that buildings, they account for 40% of all emissions now. So, uh, and then we engage the community also. That's another aspect of being a city project manager is to allow the community to review the programs, explain to them why we are doing certain things and how sustainable practices would help them, the taxpayers, in the long run.
Yeah, that was good. That makes sense. And how could you, or if you could, share a project that reflects those values and those visions? Is there a project you have in mind that was able to achieve all those successes that you are able to kind of oversee?
So my very favorite project was the George Washington Carver Museum and Library.
Huh.
And those two projects were combined because they were at the same site. This is in East Austin. And East Austin is where a very large African American community lives. But in this project, I worked in partnership with the Parks Department, who was actually the funding agency, and they hired me to do the feasibility study because this community never had a museum like this, and they didn't know what to expect. So we did many community engagement sessions, and we told them that these are our goals as to how we build it. And we always included sustainability goals in that. And they were really, supportive of that. And at every step of the project, I was doing project budget and schedule because that's our leadership. City leadership wanted to know that. At that time, we were not required. We didn't have a resolution to do lead facility,
Hmm.
but I was involved in uh, some of the lead aspects. I was taking the exam. And so I said that I would like to try lead certification in this project. And there was resistance, but we were able to at least get lead certification. And so it's a beautiful facility that opened doors to a very happy community.
Could you walk us through the importance of sustainability and how did it affect stakeholders, the design teams, and how did they approach the different costs or timelines impacted by taking the direction you go for lead?
I mean, each project I learned different things. So in George Washington Carver Museum, I learned that the design teams and even the contractor were not prepared for doing this work. We had a consultant to do lead, credit program, but everybody was learning on the job, kind of. And we had a commissioning agent. That was the most helpful thing we had, where I had to convince our city leadership as to why we needed a commissioning agent. Because generally, cities don't have so much of maintenance staff. And to maintain a lead facility which has this HVAC equipment and solar panels and other equipment that our maintenance guys were not so familiar with. So we commissioning agent really explained, provided training to them. And so I was able to convince our director and our city manager that this was useful. And so commissioning agent cost was extra, but I think in the long run it saved money.
Yeah.
I had another project where it was Austin Animal Center. And there actually we got lead gold. We reused materials which came from the site when some of the buildings were demolished. We tried pervious pavers and pervious pavement parking lots in that project. We got north light, cool light for uh, these areas and for the canals. That project was done within budget and within schedule. Sometimes we had to cut down on some of the things, but it met all the needs and we also got LEED certification. So we always had to go back to city leadership and explain to them why we are doing this and how it is helpful.
Yeah, and I think that's a very important point you make. I'm involved with commissioning myself and trying to help teams and especially owners understand the value of commissioning can be a challenge at some times, but understanding that if we invest in these systems, they have long-term benefit, but we have to make sure the team is trained to understand how to use these systems because that upfront capital cost can be high, and if you're not able to maintain them over the lifetime of the equipment, you're losing on your return on investments.
Commissioning was not required at that time when I had to convince the city leadership. Now it is required according to a resolution, but I think IECC 2024 is now effective,
Yep.
and that also requires it. So it's a good thing that it has become a requirement in our projects now.
Yeah, that's good. And could you
Yeah.
explain just a little bit for the audience about impervious pavement?
Yes, I will be happy to. So Austin Animal Center is on a very flat site. And so water was a problem. It was a problem to drain, and it was a large campus. So to have water drain properly and not get into the buildings. So we wanted to reduce the water quality pond size because again, it's a concrete structure. So we said, okay, we are going to try this pervious pavement. When you pour water on it, it just slowly drains out. It doesn't spread out. It slowly goes in. And so because it has many holes in it, and so water is supposed to seep through this and slowly drain and remain in the ground instead of just flowing out like storm water.
Yeah.
Like if you have a concrete or asphalt surface, water just flows and it collects somewhere. This allows the water to drain in the ground. And so we have many this pervious pavement sidewalks, but this is the first time in for a city project we did actual parking lot.
Mm.
And it is amazing to see when it rains, those parking lots. It slowly just drains into it and it filters it
Mm.
and remains in the ground, which is so much better than it just draining out because then it can flood out other areas.
That's good. So with that said, why do you believe policy is just as important as design?
So, as I was mentioning, some of the things we did which were not required, when you require them, it becomes a system wide change. So, when a building code is adopted by states, federal, local governments, it becomes a part of permitting process. And that's why policies are so important. Like IECC, International Energy Conservation Code, which has now become a requirement. Our city just adopted it. So it has many requirements for energy efficiency. Every project getting a permit from the city will uh, implement that. And therefore, policies are so effective.
Yeah, that's good. When you have these regulations, it pushes design teams and design teams to um, follow better ways of building, better ways of designing. And without that, you kind of don't have that push. And in many cases, the most cost effective way is the path of least resistance. So
Yeah.
that policy piece is the reason why it's providing more value beyond that basic construction.
So I would like to add one more thing here that what policy does is to make a difference in other sectors. I mention a lot in my book that building is a part of this overall system. There is transportation, there is energy generation, there is manufacturing, there is retail, there is agriculture. So policy also makes a difference in all these areas. And so that's why uh, it's sort of multiplication of benefits. When we do the transportation and move towards more electric vehicles or public transportation or light rail, or it it does reduce the overall emissions, which helps us.
That's good. So, what kind of change, just pivoting a little bit here, what kind of change have you seen through your work with Citizens Climate Lobby? If you could explain a little bit what that is and how it relates to this conversation.
So, Citizens Climate Lobby, for whom I have been volunteering for last 10 years, it's a national, non-profit, non-partisan grassroots organization whose goal is to reach out to lawmakers uh, in the U.S. Congress as well as in states and city governments. Citizens Climate Lobby uh, works with staff, and we also have members who form certain ideas. Like, for example, we want to transition out of the coal power plants. Then, what do you do? How do you do it? How do you help the states which get the power from coal? They need to transition, but they need help. And so they work with a lot of people, scientists, engineers, policymakers, researchers, to form a policy that would help them transition from coal to renewable. Our main goal is to have price carbon. But that's a very big policy, and we know that it will take time. But the most important achievement, I would say, we had was the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022 that President Biden signed it. And when he signed it, the emissions reductions goal was close to 42% reduction. nobody had ever heard no such laws in the US. But I think, like in Texas, they immediately started taking benefits of solar power. And Texas is a leader in solar power, wind, and battery. And 22,000 jobs were created and billions of dollars in economic gain benefits. In fact, red states, at one point, like 6 months ago, red states had benefited by like 105 billion by with a B, and blue states had 26 billion. CCL volunteers held 920 meetings with congressional leaders, 225,000 letters and calls to members of Congress, 2,117 letters and op-eds. So it was a significant contribution we made, along with many environmental groups, to have this law passed. And so we continue to help with permitting reform, but permitting reform really needs to be done for the eastern and the western power zones, because we generate electricity, but it can't be transmitted because we don't have good transmission lines. So they have been working on all this and on permitting reforms, and many are willing to support it, but it has not been passed yet. So CCL has been working on that also.
That's really good to hear. And with that said, how do you stay hopeful and motivated when the progress often feels kind of slow?
Yeah, in fact, right now our optimism is being tested with the dismantling of the law, and it's a bipartisan law, as I mentioned. And in our state, there are so many leaders who are Republican leaders. They say that what is happening of dismantling of this law is going to make electricity very expensive. So it is hard at times to feel motivated. The intensity and the number of extreme weather events which is affecting vulnerable people everywhere, all around the world as well as in the US. So I have a feeling that people at some point are going to realize what the policies that help them, and they express their voice to their leaders, and hopefully leaders will listen to their constituents. So we at CCL are not giving up. We are going to continue to work and work.
Yeah. So you talked about your story early on and your experiences growing up in hot climates. How important do you think the role of storytelling is in your advocacy?
So I realized that, and since I've been doing this work for last 10 years, I realized that when you just keep giving scientific facts, it doesn't quite reach people's hearts. And I really want to reach their hearts first. Mind, of course, we need facts and we need to learn that. But how do I reach their hearts? And that's how I first wrote my own, story. The chapter 3 in my book, Cooling Our Environment, has my childhood story and how we lived. And we, enjoyed, we were loved. We had, despite everything that we didn't have, I had joyful childhood. So I feel like, and when after I wrote the book, several people would come to me and say, "You know what? I remember in my grandfather's house, this is what we used to do." Because most people remember their childhood where we were not so wasteful. We cared about the resources of the earth. And I think right now we have reached a point where we need to worry about those things, because it's not just us, but so many vulnerable people and people in other parts of the world, like in Pakistan and India and Bangladesh. The sea level rise and flooding and heat in Europe. Like America had 2,325 deaths in 2023 due to heat.
Mm.
heat-related causes. Europe had many. So I feel that it's the heart emotions that I want to bring about by telling the stories. And it's not just my personal stories, but story of how the light bulbs came about, story of how air conditioning came about, and history lessons. So various such messages, how we use different building materials and the development of new materials, like cement, for example. 8% of all our emissions come from cement production. So that is a very high number when you take the whole world's emissions. And so story of cement I give. So and we didn't have cement and we could build buildings before that. And so but those stories, I feel that will help sort of make these facts more effective.
That's good. There's a other the other piece to that is understanding with cement is understanding the impacts of the embodied carbon, the amount of energy that goes into making cement, the amount of resources that goes into making that, and how can we find an alternative? What advice would you give young architects and designers and professionals who want to make a difference?
So my advice to young professionals is to start focusing on what they're seeing around their environment, the impacts of global warming. Um, and one thing that the disadvantage that they have is not very many schools have courses in their curriculum to even bring up these subjects. Architects were always focused on aesthetics, and many people probably go into architecture believing that. But there are many people like me who, understand the environmental issues. They see the community. There are some who call themselves community architects because they're concerned about all these other things. So I would like the young professionals to really see the devastating impacts that this global warming is having on us, and I would urge them to take a fresh look at our practice, that we can still build pretty buildings, but we can use techniques, passive climate design features, for example, very important one, windows that can open, uh, planting native vegetable trees around. So it can make beautiful environments, but also think of amount of energy that it uses. So keep that in mind. And there are, my book has many ideas about this. I hope they look up cooling our environment. Um, and I think possibilities are immense for them.
That's good. Yeah, no, that's good. I would certainly suggest the audience check out that book because there's a lot of ideas and strategies out there, but it's always good to hear from someone with such a wealth of knowledge and experience like yourself. One other question for you is what's one thing you think cities should do from a policy perspective?
I do think that the most effective policy would be to address transportation.
Mm.
Transportation is responsible for almost 30% of all the emissions. I think it's 28 exact. In Austin, we suffer so much. Everyone you will meet, they will talk about traffic problems. Wherever you go, traffic problems. And many cities have that, right? So I would say that cities really have to pay attention to public transportation. But I would say the second thing is to prepare climate action plan, which our city has. Our city does not have good public transportation, but the second best thing is to have climate action plan that can prepare. I mean, we have flooding issues, we have heat issues, storms which come. drought. We have all those issues in our climate. And so we do have a department which is now called Climate Action Team, and they are preparing by meeting with the community. Each community has its own issue. And so if Dow Springs has the issue of flooding, how do they provide resilience to that area's resident? How do you protect them? And so find ways for and get community input, involve community to come up with solutions in when you prepare climate action plan.
Good. Well, I really appreciate you jumping on the show and sharing your knowledge, wealth of knowledge, and all the book, Cooling Our Environment. For people, where can people find that book?
So the book is available on Amazon, but I would ask them to go to my website, which provides all these resources. It's kalpanasutaria.com. It's KalpanaSutaria.com. And they can find resources, they can find information on my city projects, and they can even contact me if they have any questions about their projects. And, I'm very happy to share and any information that they would like on Citizens Climate Lobby. So I would like them to engage with me. And again, it's kalpanasutaria.com. So KalpanaSutaria.com.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, we thank you for clearing the haze around cooling our environment and helping us understand from the perspective of policy and working with the City of Austin and your experiences there. We certainly appreciate that wealth of knowledge. And again, check out her book and the advocacy work that she is doing. Thanks again.
Thank you so much, Marcus. I really enjoyed talking to you.
Absolutely. You too. Thanks for listening to Clear Haze Exchange. New episodes drop every 2 weeks. You can catch Clear Haze Exchange on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Pandora, iHeartRadio, and more. Let's clear the haze about sustainability and energy efficiency together. Subscribe now and join the conversation.